And if you're wishing you knew more about how to make your novel, you have come to the right place, because we are going to help you put novelty into your novel, or really discover the facts that you probably already are doing it. And that's what you love most about writing. Welcome to Semi-Sages of the Pages. I'm Morgan.
This is Molly.
And I'm Teresa.
And we are so grateful that you tuned in with us today. And hopefully you're enjoying our series on how to make your dream book one page at a time. We are in the phase of architecture where we've already surveyed the land, we've already kind of outlined our story, and now we get to do a deep dive into kind of what makes your novel different, how it's going to stand out, why people are going to be excited to read it, and why it's not like all the other fairy tales out there. So starting with fairy tales, the classic of the classic, the first of the first, Molly is going to get us started on how you could take even a fairy tale and make it novel.
Yeah. Well, I think there is always appeal to fairy tales. There's always appeal to these stories that are sort of like not universally, but almost universally known. And yet that really sparks the imagination on how you can make it yours. Like there is a reason Beauty and the Beast has been retold so many times, or The Little Mermaid, or Sleeping Beauty, or whatever story you might, think of. There's a reason. And I think one of those reasons is like, how can you add your own flavor? And there's so many different ways to do that. Just go and look at all the different variations of, for example, Beauty and the Beast, right? You can have a variation where they're more adult and there's, more sexy times. That's a variation that's been done pretty famously recently. Another one, it takes place in modern times. I just read one that was a curse so dark and lonely, which is a variation on Beauty and the Beast, which is a portal fantasy. Like there's so many little ways where you can take this story and add your own twist and your own flavor to it, whether that is changing the setting, changing the characters, changing a decision that one of the characters makes at a critical moment, changing maybe, the genders of the characters, changing who is attracted to who, changing the moral of the story in the end. All of these like little things can make a vastly different story that I think really appeals to people, because they look for that twist. They look for the familiar, and then they get excited about, what's different as well. So I think there's a lot of fun and play there in those spaces.
Yeah, I think so too. And you're in the architecture phase. So you're drawing out your blueprints. So this is the chance for you to make those decisions, to say, you want to do Cyber Cinderella, which was done so brilliantly with Cinder. This is your chance to be like, and I was just talking to someone about this story, to take Alice in Wonderland, combine it with Peter Pan. Maybe Alice and Wendy maybe have a relationship. So you're right. Yeah, go for it.
I think now is a great moment to have, to remind our listeners or viewers that Teresa is also the head editor for No Bad Books, which currently has an anthology, which really touches on this. If you want to, let people know what's going on here.
Yeah. So the call is still open for Queens in Wonderland. So if you're an author and you want to go ahead and submit, it's an LGBTQ plus anthology based in Wonderland, and whatever that means to you. So it's going to be a really, really fun one. And you can go to, I'll put it in the notes below, but you can go to www.nobadbookspress.com to get more information about it. So
yeah. And put your own twist on the
story. Exactly. So, but back to kind of this. So when you're at the blueprints, the architecture phase, this is basically putting in a secret passage. How many of us have wanted to live in a house? I wanted to live in a house too, but wanted to live in a house that has the bookshelf with the book, and you pull it down, and then there's like, that it just opens up to like, I don't know, something cool, whatever you define as that. Well, now you can build something like that into your book. So maybe you do want to introduce a new character. Maybe you're writing a romance and you choose, you know what, I'm not going to do a happily ever after. I'm not. Actually, we're going to kind of go with, one of the love interests dies at the end, or the love interest goes back to their partner, their old ex at the end. This is the point where you're starting to kind of think about and make those decisions.
And I always get inspired, when you watch or you read or watch or however you consume, whether it's a fairy tale, an older book, right? Because you can't do a twist on something that is still has intellectual property tied to it, unless you're doing fan fiction, which you can write fan fiction that's absolutely true. Go ahead and do it. You just can't publish or make money off of it unless you have certain rights. That's important to know. But I always get inspired, when you read something, you are told a story and you just wish that, like, man, I wish this had gone down differently. I wish the characters would have made a different decision. I wish XYZ. Well, you as a writer, you have that power. And we're not just talking about fairy tales in this space. Like it's anything you read, you read a romance and you're like, hey, I wish that I read more romances where the main character actually just beat up the love interest. I don't know. Right.
Ooh.
That's violent. Or you wish XYZ happened. You're like, man, I never see books where they do vampires in space fighting zombie ninjas.
True.
That's
I've never seen that.
right. Nope. This is your opportunity. This could be you. If you've never seen it and you wish it existed,
now
you're a writer. You can do it.
Have fun with it. But it's not just secret passages that you have to make the decisions about. There's also two other things that at this point you need to decide on. And Morgan, what are those?
So I find that when I'm working with myself as an author and then a lot of really creative people, we are excited to put out our secret passages and our tropes. And sometimes we'll get a little too wild about, vampires in space because we want everything to be original. And sometimes that can create more work than is necessary. So sometimes linking back, like Cinder, that's what a great example, Teresa. Like linking back to those tropes can kind of ground us and ground the reader. And one way that we can take a very basic way to take our story and spin it our own is just to consider changing the POV. So who is telling the story? So you might originally think of the story in your head and it's two lovers and you tell it from the male's perspective. And then you write the entire book like I did in my first book, and you get to the end and go, this was her story. This was never meant to be told from his perspective. It was actually always meant to be told from her perspective. But I didn't really know that because I was a young author and I hadn't thought a lot about it. And so when I was analyzing POV, I felt like none of the craft books that I had read or any of the discussions that I had really had me think about how novelty and who is telling the story sets up a different type of climax, a different kind of ending, a different kind of feel. So I had read a lot of sci-fi books, and my novel was sci-fi, and they were almost all like male protagonists, and they had a certain feel. So without even thinking about it, I picked a male protagonist that had that kind of feel and was that kind of what I thought was hot in the genre. Got to the end and realized, oh man, my POV could have been different. And then it's so fun. I see great writers who will just take like their writing and shift it from first person to third person, and that changes so drastically what they're doing. Or maybe they're in third person and everything's really far away and their audience isn't connecting with them, and they switch to first person and all of a sudden they have that intimate voice. And what's so fun about that little shift of POV, who's telling it, and are they telling it in first, third, or second person? What person are they telling it in? Really changes the way the novel feels. And people have such strong opinions about whether you should be in first person or third person. And so that would be kind of something I would add.
Well, and this also gives you a chance to, if you're deciding who's telling the story, do you want to tell it from the villain's point of view? And we're seeing that more and more of, and Disney is mining that. We saw that with Maleficent. We saw that with Cruella, where they're like, okay, we've told this story. So let's go with a different angle. So that's a decision to make too.
Yeah, that's a good one.
A really famous one. And okay, let's put the author aside, because I know many of us don't agree with the author and their personal views and what they do with their personal stuff. But Orson Scott Card, very famous. There's Ender's Game. A lot of people know of the story of Ender's Game. He wrote many books, has written many books. Another one is Ender's Shadow. If you've never read it, Ender's Shadow is the same exact sequence of events as Ender's Game, but just told from a different character's perspective. So it covers the same, more or less the same time frame, the same series of events. You just get a different perspective, and it completely changes the story. It's exactly what Morgan is saying. Like, you get a whole different, the same things happen, and yet you get a whole different book. And it's very, very interesting when authors do that.
I love it when they do pets, or an unknown
Oh.
observer that you don't know till the end, or something as simple in POV is when you consider how reliable is your narrator.
Mhm.
Are you going to make that wild choice and go for the unreliable narrator?
Yeah, which I will make an argument that a first person is always an unreliable narrator,
I love that.
because none of us tell the story to ourselves, actually.
Right?
I think this also is a good place. Like, when you're deciding POV, like, who is the narrator, and is your narrator their own character?
Ooh, good points.
good.
Good
This is
point.
really important, because sometimes if you're in third person, you might have a narrator who is, if you're in first person, or depending on, your narrator is a character, right?
Mhm.
They are a character in the story. But sometimes your narrator might be separate from the story, or you might not know if they're separate or not. They might have their own distinct feel and voice separate from one of the characters on the page. And that is a very interesting choice to make. A prime example is Douglas Adams, right?
Mm.
Why can't I think of, some of the names of the books, but Douglas
Hitchhiker's
Adams,
Guide?
Hitchhiker's Guide. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was all I could think of is thanks for all the fish. Like, I
Yep.
was trying to give you a title, and that's what I got.
Right. Which is a lot of fun, because you can have a narrator who has opinions and
Mhm.
puts commentary in there that is separate from just the thoughts of the characters in your story. It can be fun. It's a decision. It is a way to be unique, and something you need to decide here, because you can't really add it in later. It's really
No.
different. You have to go back and completely rewrite,
And that's what we're trying to help you to avoid, is that you get to the end, or you get through 2 or 3 drafts and you go, shoot, this is not working. And then there's a final decision you have to make too. And that is, who wants to say it?
You.
Oh, me, I have to say it. Tense. What tense are you telling the story? And a very popular option right now is present tense. And you didn't used to see this until very recently. You would see present tense if the author was making it so that maybe whoever was telling the story, whatever character was telling the story, might die at the end. Because the assumption is that if it's past tense, well, we know whoever's telling the story survived the story. Now we're seeing some subversions in that, even with past tense now. But very, very popular is present tense books.
Yeah.
So again, another decision to make.
And as you
Now.
make that decision, it's a really good idea to write like one scene and try out.
write some
Like,
test
it's-
pages.
So yeah. So our takeaway for today is that we want you to please experiment with some of these things. Practice telling it from one person's point of view and then another. Practice maybe a paragraph or two in present, a paragraph or two in past. Try it in third person present, try it in third person past, try first person. Heck, try second. Why not? And have fun kind of seeing how it is. You might even throw it out for beta readers and say, what do you like in this voice? What do you like in that voice? How does that voice make you feel? And just kind of see what kind of emotions you get, you personally, and maybe the people that you feel like you want to make some sort of way, write an intense scene and let them see it and have them kind of say, oh yeah, I feel really sad. And that's what you wanted. Or they say, I feel really sad. And you're like, oh, they're supposed to be laughing. So we missed something with the voice, So if you try that out before you start writing your novel, you're going to be really happy because it's going to help you settle in and hear it in your head. And then you won't have to try to make those changes like a lot later, like what I had to do.
Yeah. And that was a brilliant way to tie it back to what happens at the end of this phase. If you watched our previous episode that kind of overviews the architecture phase, at the end of this phase, you should have defined how do you want the reader to feel when they close your book, when they are done with your story. So deciding these things early on helps you hone in on that. Anything else to add?
I feel like that just reminds us of Maya Angelou, and she tells us, it's not what you tell people or teach people or even experience with people, but what she's talking about is it's how it makes you feel. And that's how a book is too, right? So it's ultimately about how we make our readers feel, make ourselves feel, and that's what, we know from science drives the decision factors in our brain. So at the beginning of this episode, we promised you that we'd save you a gem for the very end. And our gem is to make sure you practice your different styles, you see how it makes you feel, and that you're really conscious about how you choose it. And we promise you won't regret it.
Great. Wonderful. All right. So join us on our Discord. Come talk with us. And then why are you still here?
Go right.
Go right.
Or go left.
Bye now.